All right. So today we're talking about the nitrogen and phosphorus cycles. So in addition to knowing the just sort of the details of the cycles, I'd like you to know why we actually need nitrogen and phosphorus. You should also know what are nitrogen fixing bacteria and why do we need those. You should be thinking about what is weathering, what is bioavailability. We're going to learn about what enzymes are. We're going to learn about fixation and nitrification and what are weathering and leaching. And I want to say here, I'm not interested in you knowing a ton of chemical details at this point. So, like, I'm going to say things like ammonia and ammonium and nitrates and nitrites. I don't really care as much about that stuff. I'm more interested in you knowing the ideas. So instead of knowing that atmospheric nitrogen has a triple bond, I'd rather have you know that atmospheric nitrogen is not easy to use. So what I'm trying to get at here is it's okay if you don't know every single chemical detail. I would rather have you have more of the story to it. Okay, so let's get into it. So we're going to start with the nitrogen cycle, and here's a picture of a lovely nitrogen with its 5 valence electrons. But actually, atmospherically, the nitrogen that you breathe in the air, it looks more like this, and it has this triple bond. And what this triple bond means for N2 or atmospheric nitrogen is that it is pretty difficult to use. This atmospheric nitrogen doesn't really play with others. It pretty much keeps to itself because it is very strongly bonded to this other nitrogen. Okay, nitrogen, atmospheric nitrogen is not dangerous. It doesn't burn. It doesn't do very much. It keeps to itself. However, we still need nitrogen. Our bodies are comprised of about 3% nitrogen. Nitrogen is a huge component of protein in your body, which is a pretty big deal. Your DNA is made of nitrogen. Amino acids have nitrogen, which again, protein. We're going to talk about this later, but you also need phosphorus. For one thing, your cell membranes, the things that cover your cells, the things that actually cover your organelles as well, are made of a phospholipid bilayer. And so you need phosphorus, which is about 2% of your body. You need phosphorus as well, because it's the phospholipid bilayer that makes up all of your cells. And again, phosphorus is the P in ATP. So you need phosphorus in order for your body to be able to utilize energy. Okay, so that's why we need nitrogen, and that's why we need phosphorus. These things are very important. So moving on with the nitrogen cycle. N2, or that triple bonded nitrogen, it's about 70% of our atmosphere. Most of our atmosphere is actually made up of this nitrogen, which is kind of cool. But then you might ask, so why is it such a big deal for us to get it? Why is it so, important? Because you breathe in and you get oxygen, and that's pretty simple. Why is nitrogen, why are we even talking about this? Can't you just inhale and get lungs full of nitrogen and use it? And the answer is not really. So the nitrogen in the atmosphere is not what is called bioavailable. So bioavailability is the amount of an element or compound that is accessible to an organism for uptake or absorption across its cellular membrane. And a simpler way of thinking about that is, like I said before, nitrogen doesn't like to play with others. And so even though you're breathing it in, it is not useful to you in this form. You can think of it kind of like if you were really thirsty and you were out on a beach by some ocean, you're not going to be able to drink that water. There's a ton of water there. Why are you thirsty? Well, it's not useful to you. It's not a perfect metaphor, but it's an okay metaphor, I think. So nitrogen, even though it's all around you, you can't really use it. Not you can't really use it. You can't use it at all. So how do we solve this problem? How do we get nitrogen? Well, we get nitrogen from plants. Actually, more like from these plants that you can actually eat. And actually, more like from these plants originally. This is a pea plant. I'm sure you guys have all had peas. It is in the Fabaceae family, and you don't need to know Fabaceae or anything. But what you should know is that these plants have nodules in their roots. And inside those nodules are called nitrogen-fixing bacteria. Inside of those nodules live nitrogen-fixing bacteria. And so you might ask, well, what is nitrogen fixing? What is nitrogen fixation? And in nitrogen fixation, you're just taking that atmospheric nitrogen and you're making it useful by turning it into ammonia. And again, ammonia is one of those things you don't need to know ammonia necessarily. But what we're doing in nitrogen fixation, this is the important part. When you fix nitrogen, you're taking it from that stuff that makes up most of the atmosphere and you're making it useful. You're making it into something that you can actually use. And the way that these bacteria do that is through this enzyme, which I've put back here, called nitrogenase. It breaks that triple bond with the enzyme nitrogenase. It's one of the only enzymes that can actually break a triple bond because that's a very strong, very, very strong bond between those nitrogens. And what this enzyme does is it lowers the energy needed to break this bond. And we're going to talk more about the details of enzymes later on in the semester. I just want to kind of sprinkle this in so you're seeing it. But this enzyme called nitrogenase lowers the energy needed to break this triple bond. Normally, this bond takes a lot of energy, but this enzyme makes it possible for these bacteria to be able to fix this nitrogen into ammonia. So, again, you're taking the atmospheric nitrogen and making it useful via the enzyme nitrogenase. Okay, so probably what I want you to know from this is that fixation is you're taking that atmospheric nitrogen and you're getting it one step closer to being biologically available. Ammonia can be made by other decomposers as well. Things in the soil will break down not just atmospheric nitrogen, but things like poop, things like decomposing bodies, and things like urine. And this is one of the reasons why you put poop on your field to use as fertilizer. So after you've made this ammonia over here, you need to continue through the process of nitrification, which is making nitrates from this ammonia. It's making nitrates and nitrites, but it doesn't matter. Well, it matters, but what I want you to know here is that you need the process of nitrogen fixation to go from atmospheric nitrogen to something more usable, and then you need the process of nitrification to go from ammonia to something even more usable. So without these symbiotic relationships, there would be much less life on Earth because we need nitrogen. We need nitrogen, again, to make proteins, to make amino acids. And so for some, that might be like, well, okay, where did the nitrogen that first got here come from in the first place? If all of this is just biologically unavailable, where do we get it? Or where did we get it originally? The answer is that lightning actually has enough energy to break those triple bonds and make bioavailable nitrogen, which is pretty cool in my opinion. There are hypotheses about origins of life, where did some of these chemicals come from, and lightning can actually do quite a bit. Humans have also figured out how to do this. We figured out how to take and make bioavailable nitrogen and use it for fertilizers. What makes it a cycle? There are denitrifying bacteria as well, such as these ones, that take your take your nitrates and nitrites and convert them back into atmospheric nitrogen. So you have the process of nitrogen fixation and then nitrification, and then you also have the process of denitrification. Do not memorize this. I don't want you to, again, don't know. You don't need to know the chemical specifics unless I tell you something you need to know. So here's a nice little summary of the nitrogen cycle. You have atmospheric nitrogen up here, which is fixed by these nitrogen-fixing bacteria that live in root nodules. It says they live in legume root nodules, but they also live freely in the soil. But these mutualistic relationships are super, super cool. Decomposers, as I mentioned, can also take and make useful nitrogen again. We also have the process of nitrification, which makes that ammonium that we fixed from atmospheric nitrogen even more useful. And then you have denitrifying bacteria, which can turn it back into or atmospheric nitrogen, which again, super cool stuff. So now we're going to talk about phosphorus and the phosphorus cycle. So why is phosphorus important? As I mentioned at the top, it is one of the P's in ATP, or it helps make up one of the P's in ATP. It is also an important component of your DNA, as we're going to discuss later on in the semester, and it's an important component of your phospholipid bilayers, which we are also going to discuss later in the semester. But every single one of your cells is surrounded by phosphorus. So where is phosphorus? Phosphorus exists in rocks, and largely sedimentary rocks, actually, because when organisms die, they deposit their sort of phosphorus-rich bodies into those rocks. But then, stuff died and put its phosphorus into sediments. But then, how do we get it? How do we get that phosphorus back? And we get it through the process of erosion, which basically causes the phosphorus deposited in those rocks to flow into water. This is through the process of weathering. And it says here, the process of weathering or being worn by long exposure to the atmosphere. Weathering provides key nutrients for life through the process of leaching. So weathering isn't specific to minerals or nutrients, whereas leaching is. So weathering can happen, but doesn't necessarily lead to any leaching. So if you just had some mineral that didn't have any nutrients that were biologically important, then leaching wouldn't happen. This is kind of an unimportant distinction, actually, but you should know what weathering and leaching are and how these things are connected to the phosphorus cycle, which is phosphorus exists in rocks. It needs to get into water so that plants can absorb it. That happens through the processes of weathering and leaching. And you can see here, this is a very nutrient-rich environment for these plants. And again, that is happening because leaching has brought nutrients into these waters. So again, we'll start with plants. Plants absorb phosphorus that is deposited in the water through animals decomposing and their phosphorus being broken down by microbial decomposers. And again, the plants got that phosphorus. These animals got the phosphorus through eating the plants. You also have underground phosphate reserves, which like I was discussing a moment ago, get leached back into waters. And we're going to talk about this later, but we have a bad problem here with fertilizer runoff. But this puts it back into our water system. And I didn't discuss this as much, but you also have geological uplift and formation of new rocks, which can then later be weathered. Okay, but this is just a pretty nice summary of what's going on in the phosphorus cycle. You have phosphorus in rocks, which gets taken into waterways. That water is taken up by plants. which are eaten by animals, which decompose, putting their phosphorus back into rocks, which gets back into the water and back into the plants.